Will Robert and Sophie overcome their past fears and finally embrace the unexpected connection that has blossomed between them? How will their journey of healing and trust unfold as they navigate the complexities of love, loss, and second chances? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more of this emotional journey. It was a cold and dreary Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that made the world outside seem like a blur of gray. The rain hammered relentlessly against Robert's truck windshield as he drove through the slick streets of Portland. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, the sound of the wipers swishing back and forth, the only thing breaking the silence inside the truck. He had promised Lily, his 9-year-old daughter, that he would pick her up from school in 20 minutes. Yet, despite the urgency of time pressing on him, Robert's attention was pulled by something else. There, just up ahead, at the bus stop, stood a woman, huddled under the thin shelter of the awning. Her figure was slight, her coat threadbare, her face barely visible beneath the hood. But it wasn't just her appearance that stopped Robert. It was the way she stood, her shoulders hunched, not just from the cold, but as if she carried the weight of the world. There was an undeniable exhaustion about her, something deeper than the usual tiredness after a long shift. She seemed to have given up. Yet in that moment, there was still a dignity about her, a quiet strength that Robert couldn't ignore. As he pulled up to the curb, his hand instinctively moved to roll down the window. The roar of the rain filled the air, but he could still make out the soft question that escaped his lips. "Need a ride?" he asked, expecting her to refuse. After all, who would accept a ride from a stranger, especially on a day like this? But when her eyes met his, they revealed something more than just tiredness. There was a pain there, an exhaustion that went beyond her long day at work. To his surprise, she nodded. With one simple gesture, they both knew this rainy Tuesday in Portland would change everything. Robert had always been a man defined by his work. A carpenter, he woke each morning before the sun, the stillness of dawn, the only companion as he made his way downstairs to his workshop. His modest two-bedroom apartment above the workshop was a small refuge where each day he worked to carve out a life for himself and his daughter, Lily. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. The scent of pine and fresh wood filled the air, the rhythmic sound of his tools a constant melody. Every piece of furniture he crafted, whether it was a small side table or a custom bookshelf, told a story. His story, their story. It wasn't just about the wood or the finished product. It was about the love and care he poured into every cut, every nail, every polish. Each project was an unspoken message to Lily that she was loved, that she was important. The apartment they called home was simple, but it held memories of breakfast routines, shared laughter, and quiet moments together. The kitchen counter, cluttered with Lily's cereal bowl and his half-empty coffee mug, was a daily reminder of their life together. Lily's pink hair, elastic, wrapped around his calloused fingers as he fumbled through another failed attempt to perfect the French braid he had watched tutorials on the night before. "Hold still, pumpkin," he would whisper, the concentration furrowing his brow deeper than any hardwood project ever could. It had been 6 years since Catherine, his wife, chose her career over their family. She had left for New York, and with her went the promises of visits that faded like the pencil marks on the wood Robert so carefully worked with. Divorce papers came with her signature already dried, and the custody agreement that followed allowed her holidays she never claimed. Robert never spoke ill of her to Lily, even though the absence of her mother left a hole that neither time nor new memories could fill. Instead, Robert filled photo albums with new moments, just the two of them. He remembered the trips to the coast, the visits to the park, and, of course, the countless hours spent in the workshop, where Lily had her own little toolbox, painted sunshine yellow. Their life was simple, but it was real, filled with love and a steady routine that gave them both something to hold on to. Yet, there was a weight Robert carried, something invisible but heavy, as he worked tirelessly to be both mother and father. Sophie had once been a rising star in the medical world. Her reputation as a brilliant pediatrician had earned her a prestigious position at one of Boston's most renowned hospitals. Her career was on a steady upward trajectory, and she had everything she had ever dreamed of: a beautiful apartment in the heart of the city, a promising fiancé, and the respect of her colleagues. But all of that changed when she became a whistleblower. Sophie had always been fiercely committed to patient care, and when she noticed corners being cut, protocols ignored, and medication switched without explanation, she couldn't stay silent. What was presented as cost optimization in the hospital became, in Sophie's eyes, something much darker, something that endangered the children she cared for. She documented everything, took her concerns to the proper channels, but in the end, her efforts cost her everything. The hospital, unwilling to face the truth, silenced her. Sophie lost her job, her reputation, and eventually, her fiancé. He couldn't bear the scandal. The damage was too much for their relationship to withstand. Sophie was left with nothing but her integrity and the scars of a career that had been ripped away from her. She packed up her life, leaving behind her luxurious Boston brownstone, and moved to Portland, a city where she hoped to rebuild, even if it meant starting from scratch. But Portland was different. Her new apartment was small, sparsely furnished, and a far cry from the life she had once known. Moving boxes piled up in corners, and she hadn't even bothered to unpack her kitchen set, a mere 3 plates and mugs serving as her entire dinnerware. The money from her wrongful termination lawsuit had mostly gone to legal fees, and the remainder barely covered her rent and living expenses. She couldn't afford luxuries like phone bills, and her phone had long since been disconnected. The loss of her previous life echoed in the quiet of her new apartment. Sophie had no job prospects, no network of supportive colleagues, and no family to turn to. Former friends blocked her calls, and those who hadn't spoke about her behind her back in online forums. She was a pariah in the medical community. And yet, despite everything she had lost, Sophie still believed in the work. She still believed in the importance of caring for others, even if it meant doing so in a place that felt so far removed from the glamorous world she had once inhabited. As she trudged through the rain, her phone dead, her purse soaked, Sophie thought about all that she had left behind. A life that once seemed so secure had crumbled, but somewhere deep inside, the hope of finding her place again, of making a difference, still flickered. She didn't know how she would get there, but she knew she couldn't stop trying. In the days that followed their brief encounter, Robert and Sophie found themselves crossing paths more often than they expected. Their first interaction had been a chance, fleeting moment, but it lingered in their minds. Sophie had spent the next few days trying to shake off the memory of the kind stranger who had offered her a ride without expectation. It wasn't just the kindness that struck her. It was the quiet way he carried himself, the way he seemed to understand, even without words, the weight she was carrying. For Robert, the encounter stirred something he hadn't felt in years: compassion, a desire to help someone beyond the boundaries of his own life. He had been so wrapped up in his routine, his solitary world, that he hadn't realized how much he longed for connection, even just for a moment. Sophie's face, so tired yet resilient, haunted him in a way he couldn't explain. He hadn't spoken much during their ride, but there had been something in her eyes that told him she had a story, just like him. It wasn't long before Robert needed to take Lily to the hospital for a routine checkup, and as fate would have it, Sophie was the one who greeted them at the pediatric ward. Robert's heart skipped when he saw her in her scrubs, the same woman from the rainstorm now working in a professional capacity. "The rain lady," Lily said, with the innocent bluntness only a child could muster, breaking the tension in the room. Sophie smiled warmly, kneeling down to Lily's level as she explained the procedure for her checkup in a way that made Lily feel safe. Robert watched in awe as Sophie shifted from the vulnerable woman he had met under the rain to a confident, skilled professional. She knew exactly how to speak to Lily, easing her fears with her calm, gentle demeanor. There was a warmth to Sophie that Robert hadn't anticipated, a softness that balanced her medical precision. As the visit ended, Robert found himself lingering in the hallway, watching Sophie work. He didn't know what he expected from her, but he was slowly realizing that the woman he had offered a ride to was more than just the sum of her circumstances. She wasn't a victim of her past. She was someone who, despite everything, still held on to her belief in helping others. Their brief, unspoken connection was undeniable, and for the first time in years, Robert found himself wondering if there was more to life than just getting by. The growing connection between Robert and Sophie, though unspoken, was undeniable, but just as quickly as it had blossomed, it began to unravel. It happened one evening when Robert's insecurities took root, and in a moment of frustration, he lashed out. The hurt of his past, the betrayal of Catherine's departure, and the fear of getting too close to someone again all collided within him. He had spent years guarding his heart, putting up walls so high that no one could penetrate them. Sophie, with her quiet strength, had managed to break through those walls in ways Robert wasn't ready for. He had hoped that their bond was something simple, something he could control. But when he saw Sophie standing in the hospital hallway, calm and composed, surrounded by the life she had built, something in him snapped. Sophie had risen from the ashes of her career, building a new life in Portland, while Robert had stayed locked in his small, safe world. It felt like he was a distraction for her, a temporary comfort until something better came along. "Were you ever going to tell me you weren't just a nurse?" Robert asked, his voice harsh, laced with bitterness. "Were you going to keep pretending you were just another person who had it all figured out while I'm over here barely holding things together?" The words stung as they left his lips, and even as he spoke them, he regretted them, but it was too late to take them back. Sophie's face fell, and the expression in her eyes cut through him like a knife. She had always been so composed, so steady, but now, in the wake of his words, She seemed to falter. Her voice was quieter than usual, her words carefully measured. "You think I'm here because I have nothing left?" she asked, the hurt barely hidden beneath her calm exterior. "I'm here because believe in something. Because even after everything I've lost, I haven't lost who I am. And I'm not looking for someone to fix me, Robert." His heart tightened in his chest as he realized the gravity of what he had just said. He had assumed Sophie was just passing through, someone who would leave as soon as her career picked up again. But in that moment, he saw how wrong he had been. Sophie wasn't someone who ran away from hardship. She had faced it head on, and in his fear, Robert had pushed her away, afraid that allowing her into his life would only lead to more pain. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, aching distance. Robert stopped returning Sophie's calls, made excuses when she showed up at his workshop. It wasn't just that he didn't want to face her. He didn't know how to face the truth of what he had just done. Meanwhile, Sophie retreated, her once vibrant presence becoming a memory that lingered in Robert's mind like an unspoken apology. Both of them struggled in their separate worlds, unsure of how to move forward, trapped in the weight of their own fears. The weeks that followed were heavy, and Robert found himself drifting through his days in a fog. He had pushed Sophie away, but the regret was a constant, nagging presence, creeping in during the quiet moments when he was alone with his thoughts. Lily, ever perceptive, had noticed the change in her father. She asked questions he didn't know how to answer, sensing the tension between Robert and the woman who had once seemed like an unexpected but comforting presence in their lives. Robert had spent so many years protecting his daughter from the pain of losing her mother that he had never stopped to consider how deeply his own wounds ran. When Sophie had come into their lives, it had been like a breath of fresh air. But now, with the space between them, Robert could feel the weight of his own fears crushing him. He wasn't ready to admit it, but deep down, he knew he had to find a way to fix what he had broken. The moment that broke through his wall of stubborn pride came one evening, in the form of a crisis no parent should ever have to face. Lily had developed a high fever, her small body burning with the kind of heat that no amount of over-the-counter medicine could touch. Panic started to rise in Robert's chest as the night wore on, and Lily's condition worsened. The emergency room was overcrowded, and the nurses were overworked. Robert's heart raced as he overheard someone mention a pediatric specialist who had just returned from Boston. It was Sophie. His mind flashed back to the hurtful words he had spoken, to the cold distance he had put between them. But now, it was her expertise that was needed, and Robert had no choice but to swallow his pride. Sophie appeared in the emergency room like a calm force, stepping into the chaos with the steady grace of someone who had been through more than her fair share of battles. Robert watched her take charge, her voice firm but gentle as she assessed Lily's condition and began directing the team. There was no hesitation in her actions, only a quiet authority that Robert had never fully understood until now. He stood in awe, a mix of guilt and gratitude swirling inside him. When the crisis was over, when Lily was finally stabilized and sleeping under observation, Robert approached Sophie at the nurse's station. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. Sophie didn't look up from her charting, but the way she responded, soft and steady, struck something deep inside him. "I took an oath," she said, not looking up, but her words resonated in the quiet of the room. To help anyone who needs care. The simplicity of it hit him harder than any grand gesture could. Sophie hadn't just saved his daughter, she had saved him from the crippling fear that had kept him from seeing the truth all along. You turned down the Boston reinstatement, didn't you? Robert asked, his voice barely above a whisper, the question hanging in the air. Sophie nodded, her eyes tired but resolute. I realize success means nothing if I'm not where my heart is, she said. And in that moment, Robert understood. He had been too afraid to admit his own heart, but Sophie had shown him that love wasn't about holding on to what had been lost. It was about having the courage to build something new. The weight of his regret began to lift, replaced by a new sense of clarity. Sophie had never been about finding a quick escape or a temporary distraction. She was here because she had chosen to be, and now it was Robert's turn to choose. The days after the hospital visit were marked by an uneasy silence between Robert and Sophie. Though the crisis had passed, the emotional distance between them lingered like an unspoken truth neither was ready to confront. Robert, still grappling with the guilt of pushing Sophie away, found himself reflecting on everything he had said to her, all the assumptions he had made out of fear. He had always prided himself on being a man of action, a man who could fix things. But this mess of emotions and regrets, felt beyond his ability to repair. Sophie, on the other hand, was no stranger to the weight of loss. She had spent years rebuilding her life after losing everything in Boston, and she knew that healing wasn't always linear. But even though she had stood by Robert in his moment of need, she couldn't help but feel the sting of his words. She had opened herself up to him in ways that felt vulnerable and raw, only to be met with the sharp edge of his insecurities. Yet, Sophie wasn't one to shy away from the truth, no matter how difficult. As the days passed, she found herself wondering if Robert had the courage to face his own fears, to let go of the past and build something with her, not just for the sake of his daughter, but for himself. It wasn't long before they found themselves at the farmer's market one Saturday morning, an unspoken truce in the air. Robert noticed Sophie walking past their booth, glancing at the handcrafted items they had on display. Emma, with her usual enthusiasm, waved and called out to her. Sophie smiled, though there was an air of hesitancy in her step. As she approached, Emma proudly showed off their latest creations, and the conversation, once awkward, began to flow more naturally. Robert caught glimpses of the woman he had met during that rainy evening. Strong, kind, and open to the possibility of something more. He realized in that moment that the choice he needed to make wasn't just about rebuilding his life for Lily. It was about finding the courage to let someone else in, to embrace the kind of love that wasn't perfect, but real.